At a family BBQ, relatives humiliated a girl because of her skin color. But when a limousine pulled up, everything changed. Subscribe. And write in the comments, where are you watching this from? The invitation came on a Wednesday, printed on ivory cardstock with gold embossing as if dressing up old habits in formal attire could hide their familiar sting. It had arrived in a pristine envelope with a delicate wax seal, Amanda's signature touch, always more concerned with appearances than substance. It lay on the kitchen counter for 3 days before Mary dared to open it. Each time she passed by, her stomach twisted tighter. She didn't need to read it to know what it said. It was the same every summer. Annual family barbecue at Amanda's. Bring a dish, bring your smiles, bring your love. Bring your tolerance, Mary thought bitterly. Bring your armor. Bring your daughter so they can remind her, however subtly, that she doesn't belong. The fourth morning, Mary finally broke the seal. Her fingers moved slowly, mechanically, as if given in to something inevitable. She read the lines carefully, though she already knew what they'd say. The handwriting was Amanda's. Neat, symmetrical, unmistakably controlled. We'd love to see you and Laya this year. It's been too long. The whole family will be there. Let's make memories. She didn't include the last time. She didn't mention the passive-aggressive jokes about urban style, or how Aunt Margaret had patted Laya's curls like a poodle's coat. She didn't mention that 2 summers ago, Laya had sat alone at the kids' table, ignored by cousins who once used to play with her until they grew old enough to learn what their parents never said aloud. Amanda didn't mention how the laughter around the grill always shifted when Mary and her daughter walked past, or how their father's name, James, was rarely, if ever, uttered anymore. Mary crumpled the invitation slightly in her hand, then laid it flat again, smoothing out the crease with guilty fingers. Across the room, Laya sat on the couch, headphones in, sketchbook on her lap. She was humming to herself, some soft melody she'd probably created in her head. Mary knew those tunes well. James used to say she was born with a rhythm in her veins. "Sweetie?" Mary said, careful not to sound strained. Laya looked up, pulling out one earbud. "We got an invitation from Aunt Amanda." Laya's face lit up in the way that always made Mary's heart ache. "Really? For the barbecue?" "Yeah." "Are we going?" The pause stretched longer than it should have. Mary opened her mouth to lie, to say they had other plans, that maybe next year. But the hope in Laya's eyes caught her like a hook. She wanted to believe her family could change. She was only 14. She still believed people could learn, evolve, welcome. Mary forced a small smile. "If you want to." Laya nodded quickly, enthusiasm blooming across her face. "I do." She would spend the next 2 days preparing in a way Amanda's children never had to. She chose a dress carefully, something she had saved up for, a light pink cotton dress with embroidered flowers near the hem. She had altered it herself, sitting on the floor of her bedroom with a needle and thread, whispering to the fabric as if coaxing it into cooperation. She tried different hairstyles, finally deciding to leave her curls natural but defined, pulled back slightly with a soft headband. She polished her sandals, chose a simple necklace, and set aside her favorite bracelet, the one she'd bought with her own money at the school fair. Mary watched it all with a mix of awe and dread. She helped where she could, ironing the dress, making sure the shoes were comfortable. But mostly she observed. Laya wanted to be seen. She was preparing not just to be present, but to be acknowledged, maybe even accepted. The day of the barbecue arrived hot and thick with late July humidity. Mary packed a bowl of her famous lemon orzo salad, the one Amanda always asked her to bring, even though she never actually ate it. They loaded into the car, mother and daughter dressed in their best, the air conditioning blasting. Mary kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other occasionally resting on her daughter's knee. "You look beautiful," she said. Leah smiled. "Thanks, Mom." They drove in silence for a while, the kind that hummed with things unsaid. Mary thought about James, how he used to hum jazz standards when he was nervous. He would have hated these barbecues, but he would have gone. For Leah. When they turned into Amanda's neighborhood, Mary felt her chest tighten. The houses were all the same. Manicured lawns, brick facades, white shutters, and symmetry so rigid it felt suffocating. Amanda's house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a two-story colonial with hydrangeas perfectly spaced under the front windows. Cars lined the driveway. Laughter spilled from the backyard, mingling with the scent of grilled meat and the thump of upbeat music. Mary parked down the street, not wanting to block anyone in. As they walked toward the house, Mary felt the old weight settle over her shoulders. Inside the gate, the party swelled around them. Children ran through sprinklers and swimsuits. Adults lounged in Adirondack chairs, drinks in hand. A long folding table groaned under the weight of hot dogs, potato salad, watermelon wedges. Amanda spotted them almost immediately. She was standing near the grill, tall and composed in a white linen dress, gold bangles clinking on her wrist. Her blonde hair was tied back in a sleek bun, and her nails gleamed with pale pink polish. "Mary," she called out, gliding toward them with arms outstretched. "You made it!" Her hug was brief, one-armed. Her eyes darted to Leah, and for a fraction of a second her smile faltered. "Look at you," she said, the praise just slightly too sharp. "You've grown so much. That dress, did you sew it yourself?" Mary bristled. Leah smiled shyly and shook her head. "Well, it's unique," Amanda said, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby ears. Mary didn't reply. She placed the salad on the table and steered Leah toward the shade, scanning the yard for any friendly faces. None emerged. Amanda reappeared a moment later with a tray of soda cans. "Leah, sweetie, would you mind handing these out? The kids are being lazy, and the adults are thirsty." Without waiting for a reply, she pressed the tray into the girl's hands and walked off. Leah hesitated, the tray wobbling. She looked at Mary with uncertain eyes. Mary's throat tightened. "Go ahead, love," she said quietly. "It's okay." Leah turned and began her slow procession, offering drinks to people who barely looked at her. Some took cans without a word. Others smiled thinly, then turned away. A few children accepted theirs with exaggerated politeness, mimicking the adults around them. Mary found an empty chair and sat, gripping her knees. It was happening again. The isolation, the polite disdain, the slow erosion of dignity masked as family tradition. She glanced toward her daughter just in time to see one of Amanda's twins whisper something to a cousin, their laughter following Leah as she walked away. Mary stood, walked over to the food table, and poured herself a drink she didn't want. She needed something to hold, something to stop her hands from shaking. She caught snippets of conversation, job promotions, vacation plans, complaints about taxes, but none of it felt real. It was all too neat, too curated. No one asked how she was. No one asked about Leah's school, her interests, her dreams. Mary turned and caught sight of her daughter near the hedges, offering a can of ginger ale to Uncle Simon. He took it without a glance, muttered a gruff "thanks," then turned his back. Mary saw Leah's shoulders drop, the way her lips pressed together to stop them from trembling. And yet, the girl kept going, carrying that tray like it was armor. Mary wanted to scream. Instead, she breathed, deep, slow, painful. The afternoon had just begun. Mary watched her daughter move between plastic lawn chairs and folding tables with a poise that was far too practiced for a 14-year-old. The sun had begun to hang low over the backyard, casting a warm, golden hue over everything, except, it seemed, over Laya. She moved through the crowd like a shadow, her tray slowly emptying as adults reached for their drinks without looking her in the eye. The laughter around her was loud, but it never included her. It bounced off her like a wall of noise, a language she hadn't been taught. Mary's grip on her own paper cup tightened as she stood near the drink station, pretending to choose between sweet tea and lemonade. Her eyes never left Laya. The girl's movements were careful, each step measured. She nodded politely at people who didn't nod back, smiled at children who scurried away toward more familiar playmates. With every step, her face fell further, not into sadness, but into a practiced neutrality. The kind Mary knew too well. It was the same expression she had worn at her husband's funeral, when even then Amanda had whispered that Laya had James's nose, with the sort of tone that made it sound like a flaw. Amanda returned to Mary's side, her manicured fingers wrapped around a sweating glass of sangria. Her voice was light, full of exaggerated amusement. "Did you see the way she held that tray? So elegant. She might have a future in catering." She laughed softly, a crisp sound that floated above the music playing from the speakers near the grill. Mary didn't respond. Her stomach twisted. She turned to face Amanda fully, opening her mouth, but before she could speak, Amanda had already stepped away, drawn toward another group of guests, a seamless escape perfectly timed. Laya approached the table with the last 2 cans on her tray. She looked at Mary briefly, her eyes asking a question she couldn't voice. Mary gave a small nod, encouraging, though the gesture cost her. She could see the flush in her daughter's cheeks, the way her shoulders had begun to curl inward slightly. The armor was starting to slip. "Could you grab me a napkin?" Mary asked gently, trying to give her an excuse to step away. Laya nodded and hurried off, her sandals quiet against the grass. Mary turned toward the grill where Amanda was holding court with her usual circle. Cousins gathered around her like satellites. The men laughed too loudly, and the women nodded too eagerly. Mary recognized the choreography. These gatherings were never about connection. They were auditions, performances, showcases of who had gained the most weight, lost the most money, changed their hair or their partner. Under the smiles were layers of competition, critique, and quiet cruelty. Mary caught snippets of conversations. A cousin bragging about his son's scholarship. Another lamenting the difficulty of finding good private school teachers. No one asked about Laya. No one remembered that she composed music, that she sketched patterns for clothes she dreamed of sewing. No one saw her. Not really. A small commotion near the dessert table caught Mary's attention. Laya had returned and accidentally brushed against a woman holding a plastic plate full of cookies. The woman gasped, the plate tilted, and 3 cookies fell to the grass. Laya bent to pick them up immediately, murmuring an apology, but the woman gave her a tight, performative smile and said loudly, "No need to be nervous, sweetheart. We're all family here." Another cousin chuckled. "She's just shy, or maybe she thinks she's at a job interview." The laughter that followed was sharp, almost gleeful. Mary's blood ran hot. She took a step forward, then paused. Laya had frozen, cookies still in her hand. Her face was turned away, but Mary knew what was behind it. that careful control, that effort not to let them see her break. A moment later, Amanda's voice cut across the yard again, this time louder and clearer. "Lia, sweetie," she called. "Did you get that dress off Etsy, or is it one of your creative projects?" Her voice carried a mocking lilt, amusement bubbling just under the surface. Very expressive. Laughter again. A couple of guests looked uncomfortable, glancing away, but no one said anything. Mary moved. She didn't think, didn't plan. Her body just went. She walked past folding chairs and patio lanterns through a sea of unfamiliar faces who had never once truly tried to know her or her child. She reached Lia just as the girl was setting the cookies gently on the edge of the table. Lia didn't look up. Her mouth was tight, her fingers clenched. Before Mary could speak, a firm hand grasped her arm. She turned to see her mother, Darlene, seated at a picnic table beneath the oak tree, her sun hat tilted just enough to shade her face. "She needs to toughen up," her mother muttered, her voice low but resolute. "The world isn't kind. You're not doing her any favors by coddling her." Mary stared at her, momentarily stunned. The woman's tone was not cruel, but dismissive, as though speaking about Lia as an object in need of hardening, not a human being in need of care. "She's 14, Mary whispered back. "She's not supposed to be tough yet." But her mother had already turned away, fanning herself with a paper plate, eyes scanning the yard for something more interesting. Mary jerked her arm free and crossed the grass to her daughter. She stood beside her, close but not touching. Lia still didn't look at her, but her breath was shallow. Her chin trembled for half a second before she caught herself. Mary leaned in, whispering, "Let's sit for a bit. You've done enough." They found a spot near the hydrangeas, partially hidden from the center of activity. Lia sat with her knees pulled close, hands clasped in her lap. Mary sat beside her, feeling the weight of the afternoon bearing down on them both. She wanted to reach out, to gather her daughter into her arms and say all the right things, but she knew too well how fragile Lia's composure was. The slightest touch might shatter it. Music continued to play. The grill hissed. Somewhere, a child screamed with delight as a water balloon burst. Mary's sister-in-law approached with a tray of mini quiches and offered some with a painted-on smile. Mary declined. The woman shrugged and moved on without another word. "What if we just left?" Lia said softly. Mary turned toward her. "Do you want to?" Lia hesitated. "I don't know." Mary nodded slowly. "We don't have to stay if you don't want to. I just thought maybe this year would be different." The words hit Mary like a blow, not because they were unexpected, but because she herself had whispered the same thing in her own mind that very morning. She reached out then and gently touched Lia's wrist. Her daughter didn't pull away. "I know, baby," she said. "I thought so too." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then, as if on cue, Amanda's voice rose once more from across the lawn. "Oh, come on, it was just a joke," she was saying to someone. "She's a teenager, not a porcelain doll." Someone else murmured agreement. Laughter again. The same rhythm, the same cadence. It was a melody of dismissal Mary knew by heart. She closed her eyes just for a second. Just long enough to imagine what it would feel like to stand up and tell them all exactly what they were. To throw their champagne glasses into the grass and walk out with her head held high. Instead, she opened her eyes and smiled tightly at her daughter. "Let's just get through the next hour," she said. "We can do that, then we're gone." Lia nodded. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the yard like long fingers, and somewhere in the distance the low rumble of an approaching engine began to hum through the air. The sound grew steadily louder, low and deep, cutting through the laughter, the music, and even the wind rustling the branches overhead. Mary turned her head slowly, instinct tightening in her chest. Across the yard, several guests paused in conversation, craning their necks toward the driveway, unsure whether the approaching growl of the engine signaled something to be concerned about, or something to be gawked at. The murmur of voices softened, then stalled, like a wave drawing back from the shore before a storm. Mary looked at Leah. Her daughter was sitting perfectly still on the edge of the bench, hands folded in her lap, her face calm in the way it only got when everything inside her was trembling. She had heard it too. The black limousine pulled into view like a dark ship emerging from fog, sleek, glossy, and entirely out of place among the weathered SUVs and modest sedans lining Amanda's cul-de-sac. It glided to a halt just outside the gate. The windows were tinted to a mirror sheen, reflecting the rows of hydrangeas and the puzzled faces of party guests now standing with paper plates in hand and half-chewed appetizers in their mouths. No one spoke. Even the Bluetooth speaker had cut out, or perhaps someone had turned it down without realizing it. The silence was sudden and dense. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that somehow looked relaxed in the humid air. He moved with a calm, precise energy, like someone used to being watched and never needing to explain why. His skin was rich and dark, his face clean-shaven, and his eyes focused immediately on the yard beyond the gate. For one ridiculous moment, Mary wondered if someone famous had gotten lost and taken a wrong turn into their neighborhood. That thought dissolved when the back door of the limousine opened and another figure emerged, a woman this time. She was tall as well, elegant, composed, with dark hair swept into a smooth chignon and a pale gray blouse tucked into tailored black pants. Her heels clicked once on the gravel, then fell silent as she stepped onto the path, scanning the gathering without hesitation. Mary felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The woman's eyes moved deliberately across the lawn. Past the grill, past the drink table, past Amanda, who stood frozen mid-conversation, holding a flute of Prosecco in her hand. Her gaze was not curious nor cautious. It was searching for someone specific, and when she found Leah, she smiled. Mary saw it in the subtle lift of her brows, in the softening of her expression. Without a word, the woman walked straight through the open gate, her stride graceful but direct. The driver remained behind, standing by the car with professional detachment. Leah was now on her feet, the tray long discarded somewhere behind the lemonade station. Her hands twitched nervously at her sides. She glanced at her mother, confused. Mary stood with her, too, though she wasn't entirely sure when her legs had moved. Amanda broke the silence first, her voice brittle with forced hospitality. "Excuse me. Hello? Can we help you?" She stepped into the woman's path, a carefully arranged smile frozen on her face like a mask. The woman didn't stop. She gave Amanda a polite, fleeting nod, then stepped around her as effortlessly as one steps around a low shrub. Amanda's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She turned to follow, clearly trying to maintain control, but already trailing behind. The woman reached Leah and knelt slightly, just enough to bring her eyes level with the girls. The entire backyard, it seemed, had stopped breathing. Mary moved toward them instinctively, her feet crunching the grass, though her mind felt light and unstable. She didn't recognize this woman, had never seen her before in her life. And yet, here she was, in front of her daughter, speaking in a voice too low to be heard over the stunned silence. Laya blinked, her mouth parting slightly, and looked back at her mother with a question written across her face. Mary reached them just as the woman stood again. She turned and extended her hand. "Miss Callie Morgan?" the woman asked. Mary nodded automatically. "Yes," she said, her voice rougher than expected. "My name is Amelia Blackwell," the woman said. "I've been trying to reach you through your daughter's school. They weren't sure if you'd be attending this gathering." Mary frowned. "I'm sorry. What is this about?" Amelia smiled then, not the thin kind worn by Amanda and her guests, but something warmer, something real. She turned back to Laya. "A few months ago, your daughter submitted a musical composition and a visual project to her school counselor. It was forwarded to us as part of a statewide youth arts initiative. We reviewed over 300 submissions." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle into the space between them. "Your daughter's work stood out immediately." Laya made a soft sound, almost a breathless gasp. She looked up at Mary, stunned. "She's been selected for the Blackwell Rising Creators Program," Amelia continued. "It's a competitive mentorship initiative in partnership with the National Conservatory for the Arts. Full summer scholarship, travel and lodging included. She'll work directly with some of the top mentors in music and visual storytelling in the country." The silence around them cracked. Someone dropped a fork. A plastic cup hit the grass with a soft thud. Amanda was the first to recover, stepping forward with a brittle laugh. "Wait, I thought this was some kind of mistake. I mean, Laya? She draws cartoons in a notebook." Mary turned slowly, her voice sharper than she intended. "They're not cartoons. They're compositions. They're art." Amanda shrugged, her expression stiff. "I'm just saying. She's a kid. She's never taken real classes or anything." Amelia didn't flinch. Her voice remained cool, her words precise. Talent like hers doesn't always wait for formal instruction. It grows in quiet places, and when it's recognized, it deserves to be nurtured. Mary looked at her daughter again, and what she saw nearly broke her. Laya was still frozen in place, her hands trembling, but her eyes, those deep, thoughtful eyes, were wide with something new. Not fear, not humiliation, but the first flickers of recognition, of worth, of pride. Amelia reached into her leather satchel and produced a white envelope, sealed with a gold crest. Inside is the official invitation, a schedule, and a letter from the director of the conservatory. She held it out to Laya, who took it with reverent hands. Her fingers traced the edge of the seal, as though afraid it might vanish if she looked away. "We have a welcome dinner this evening," Amelia said gently. "A car is waiting. If she chooses to accept, we'd love to take her with us today." Mary turned back to Amanda, whose smile had fully collapsed. She now stood with her arms folded, her posture defensive. Their mother, seated behind her, looked confused, as if trying to piece together a story that didn't fit the narrative she had spent years constructing. Mary looked back at her daughter and nodded. "Go get your bag," she said. "We're done here." Laya blinked, almost in disbelief. "What about—" "We're done," Mary said again, louder this time. "Go." Laya didn't hesitate again. She turned and hurried toward the car, her sandals beating a rhythmic, triumphant pulse on the grass. Her dress fluttered behind her like a flag. Amanda stepped into Mary's path. "Come on, Mary. Don't be dramatic." Mary stared straight into her eyes. "You humiliated my daughter," she said. "You treated her like a servant. You mocked her clothes, her presence, her very existence. That wasn't family. That was cruelty. And I'm done pretending otherwise." Amanda opened her mouth to argue, but the words didn't come. Instead, she looked to their mother for backup. Darlene didn't stand. She didn't speak. Mary looked back at Amelia. "How soon does she need to leave?" "The dinner starts in 2 hours," Amelia replied. "We have a hotel room prepared for her. She can call you once she's settled." Laya returned then, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The bracelet on her wrist caught the sun as she adjusted the strap. She looked to her mother, unsure. Mary nodded. "If you want to go, then go. I'll be here when you come back." Laya didn't speak, but she hugged her tightly, burying her face in her mother's neck for a moment. When she pulled away, her eyes were clear. Amelia placed a hand on the girl's back and guided her toward the limousine. The driver opened the door. Laya climbed in without looking back. Only when the car began to roll away did Mary turn back to the gathering. She faced the people who had made her daughter feel like a burden. "You didn't break her," she said quietly. "You tried, but you failed. Then she turned and walked to her car, the envelope from the conservatory still warm in her hands. The drive home was quiet. Mary didn't turn on the radio. The silence wasn't empty. It was dense, weighty, full of things finally settling after being jostled for years. She held the steering wheel in both hands, her fingers clenching and relaxing without rhythm, her knuckles white against the leather. Her heart still beat too quickly, as if her body hadn't yet realized that the confrontation was over. Her mind, however, replayed every word, every glance, every silence, every shame-filled moment that had built to what had just happened. And finally, that one precious moment when Laya climbed into the black car and never looked back. She parked in front of her modest 2-bedroom house and sat for a few minutes without turning off the ignition. The porch light hadn't yet come on, but the late afternoon sun painted everything in amber and shadows. Her stomach churned. Not with doubt. She knew she had done the right thing, but with a kind of exhausted grief. Not for her daughter, who was finally where she belonged, but for herself. For the years she had spent trying to keep a peace that had never really existed. Inside, the house was still, lived in, warm, and full of reminders of James. The worn leather chair in the corner of the living room where he used to read sheet music, the framed photo of him holding newborn Leah in the hospital, his saxophone case tucked beneath the coat rack. She walked past it all, set her keys on the table, and finally let her body sink into the couch. Only then did the tears come. They weren't dramatic. They didn't fall in waves. They were quiet and sudden, hot on her cheeks as if her soul had finally found a crack in the dam wide enough to let go. She didn't cry because she regretted what she'd said or because she was worried about Laya. She cried because the illusion had shattered. The one she had carried since her husband's funeral, the idea that maybe one day her family would soften, that maybe if she just kept showing up, they'd finally accept Laya, that if she smoothed her tone, swallowed her pride, smiled through the bruises, they'd change. But they hadn't, and she knew now they never would. It had been a lie. A beautiful, painful lie she had clung to like a rope while dangling over the ledge of isolation, because the alternative, cutting ties, had seemed too terrifying, too permanent. Her phone buzzed beside her on the cushion. She wiped her face with the heel of her palm and reached for it. A text from an unknown number. "Your daughter arrived safely. We'll send you a check-in message after dinner." Beneath the text was a photo. Laya stood in front of a hotel, her pink dress still perfect, her backpack over one shoulder. The sun glinted off the glass behind her, and her hair caught the light in delicate spirals. But it was her face that arrested Mary's breath. Laya was smiling. Not the small, careful smile she wore at family gatherings, not the guarded one she gave when she wasn't sure she was welcome. This was open, radiant. Her head was held high, her chin slightly raised, her shoulders back. She looked like someone who had just stepped into her own life. Mary stared at the photo for a long time. She traced the outline of Laya's figure with her eyes, then closed them briefly, letting the moment sink deep into her bones. She had almost robbed her daughter of this by staying silent, by keeping peace, by choosing civility over truth. The next few hours passed slowly. She moved through the house without purpose, tidying things that didn't need tidying. She cleaned the kitchen, even though it was already clean. She folded laundry that had already been folded. She kept checking her phone even though there were no new messages. Dusk fell. She turned on the porch light and left it burning. It wasn't until almost 10 o'clock that her phone rang. This time, it was a call. She answered on the first ring. "Hi, Mom." The voice on the other end was soft but different, more grounded, more sure. "Hi, sweetheart. Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay." Laya sounded like she was smiling again. "We had dinner with the other students. They're from all over. One girl's from New York, another from Oregon. Everyone's really nice. And we each got a journal with our names on the cover. Tomorrow I get to pick my mentor, a real designer." Mary laughed, a breathy, startled laugh that came from deep in her chest. "You sound like you've been waiting for this your whole life." There was a pause, then a quiet, "I think I have." They talked for another 10 minutes, the kind of conversation Mary knew she would replay in her head for weeks. When it came time to hang up, they said, "I love you," without hesitation, and Mary stayed sitting on the couch long after the line went quiet. In the morning, the facade of normalcy began to crumble. Amanda had posted a photo from the barbecue on social media. A shot of the backyard, kids playing, drinks in hand, smiling faces. The caption read, "Family first. So proud of our talented next generation. Always cheering for you, Laya." Mary stared at it with disbelief, as if Amanda had been nothing but supportive, as if her laughter hadn't sliced Laya in two. The comments beneath the post were predictable. A few cousins chimed in with a congratulations. Someone asked why no one had heard about Laya's big opportunity earlier. Someone else wrote, "Wow, can't believe how grown up she is." Mary didn't respond. She didn't need to. Later that day, her mother sent a message. A single line, "I hope we can move past all the drama. Life is too short, no apology, no acknowledgement, just a desire to move on and pretend nothing had happened." Mary deleted the message without replying. The days passed in a rhythm of rediscovery. Laya called each night with updates from the program. She sent photos of her sketches, snapshots of fabric swatches pinned to corkboards, glimpses of classrooms filled with music stands and sewing machines. Her smile grew wider in each image. In one, she stood beside a mentor who had designed gowns for Grammy-winning artists. In another, she was laughing with a group of students as they compared notes on their projects. Mary printed a few of the photos and pinned them to a corkboard in the hallway. She replaced the old framed photo of the family's last barbecue from 3 years ago with one of Laya holding her official invitation, standing beneath the conservatory's emblem. Laya's voice on the phone had changed. It carried clarity now, confidence. Not arrogance, but a growing certainty that she belonged in spaces she had never imagined would open to her. By the 5th week of the program, they began discussing the final showcase. Each student would present a completed project, designed, refined, and brought to life with the help of their mentors. Mary made plans to attend, booking a hotel room near the city where the showcase would be held. It would be the first time she had seen Laia in person since that afternoon at Amanda's. She wondered if her daughter would look different, if the changes she heard in her voice would be visible too. When the day finally arrived, Mary dressed carefully. She wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but one James had always loved on her. As she drove into the city, the skyline rising ahead like a promise, she felt a mix of nervousness and awe. She didn't know what to expect. All she knew was that she had never been more proud. The auditorium was bright and elegant, filled with rows of parents, artists, faculty, and press. Mary found a seat near the front, clutching the program in her hands. When the lights dimmed and the music began, a hush fell over the audience. One by one, the students presented their work. Each piece was met with applause, nods, admiration. Then, near the end of the program, the lights shifted, and a model stepped onto the stage wearing something that made Mary's breath catch in her throat. The dress was soft, flowing, but layered with intricate textures. It combined musical motifs with a subtle floral pattern, stitched in pale pinks and silvers. The lines were bold but elegant, confident but gentle. It was Laia's voice in fabric. The crowd applauded. Mary's eyes welled with tears. One of the judges whispered something to a colleague and nodded, smiling. Backstage, after the show, Laia ran to her mother and threw her arms around her. "I can't believe I did that," she whispered. Mary pulled her close. "You didn't just do it," she said. "You soared." They drove home that night with the windows cracked, the air cool and clean. Laia stared out the window, then turned to her mother. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Mary didn't ask who she meant. "Maybe," she said after a long pause. "Or maybe it doesn't matter anymore." Laia nodded, then smiled faintly. "I don't think I need them to. Not really." Mary reached for her daughter's hand and held it as the miles slipped by behind them. She thought about everything they had left and everything they had finally found. It had been 3 months since that afternoon in Amanda's backyard. 3 months since Mary watched her daughter climb into a black limousine with her head held high, leaving behind the faces that had never really seen her. 3 months since Mary had spoken to most of her family. The silence from them, once something that would have unsettled her, now felt like a relief. It meant no forced smiles, no carefully worded texts pretending nothing happened, no invitations laced with hidden expectations. It meant peace. In those months, Laia had transformed, not in the superficial ways that come with time or age, but in the subtle, deeper shifts that mark true growth. Her bedroom walls were no longer bare. Now they were covered in sketches, inspiration boards, photographs of fabrics, clippings from magazines, notes scribbled in the margins of music sheets. It looked like a storm of creativity had passed through and decided to stay. Her desk, once neat and rarely used, had become a permanent workstation. Spools of thread, rolls of muslin, colored pencils, swatches of velvet and lace filled every corner. She walked differently now with a stride that carried intent. When she spoke, she didn't pause to gauge how her words might be received. She didn't shrink back when questioned. At school, she volunteered to lead group projects. She raised her hand in class. She corrected people gently but firmly when they mispronounced her name. Her counselor told Mary that she was applying for an advanced arts program in partnership with a university. and had been accepted without hesitation. No audition, no interview, just the strength of her portfolio and the recommendation from her summer mentor. Sometimes Mary would stand in Lia's doorway and watch her work. The girl would be bent over her desk, tongue slightly between her teeth, fully immersed in a sketch or a hem. And Mary would remember a time, not so long ago, when that same girl sat in the back of classrooms too nervous to speak up, afraid of being the only one who didn't belong. One evening, they sat cross-legged on the carpet of Lia's room, flipping through the scrapbook she had put together from her summer program. It was thick with photos, ticket stubs, fabric samples, and handwritten notes from instructors. Near the back was a small envelope sealed with gold wax. Lia opened it and pulled out a note written on creamy paper in an elegant, slanted script. Amelia Blackwell's handwriting. Stay bold, stay kind, and never wait for permission to shine. Lia read the note again, then looked up at her mother. Her face was quiet, thoughtful. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," she said softly. "But now, I think maybe I was just in the wrong rooms." Mary couldn't answer right away. Her chest swelled with a kind of pride that made it hard to breathe. She reached out and took her daughter's hand. "You were never the problem," she said. "They just refused to see who you really were." She meant Amanda. She meant their mother. She meant all of them, but she also meant herself. For years, Mary had tried to smooth the path, to ease the tension, to shield Lia by forcing her into spaces that were never built to hold her. She had told herself that showing up meant strength, that keeping the family together was worth the small humiliations. That inclusion, however incomplete, was better than absence. But she had been wrong. Inclusion at the cost of dignity wasn't inclusion at all. It was permission to be mistreated, repackaged as tradition. It was endurance dressed up as grace. And she had finally let go of it. They received a letter from Amanda 1 week later. Not handwritten, not personal. Typed, brief. She hoped they were doing well. She thought maybe the family could find a way to move on. She didn't mention the barbecue. She didn't mention her mockery or her silence. She certainly didn't apologize. Mary read it once and tucked it into the back of a drawer without replying. A few cousins had reached out through social media. One asked about Lia's new school. Another commented on a photo Mary had posted of Lia holding an award from her school's fall art showcase. None of them brought up what had happened. None of them asked how she had felt that day. Mary didn't ignore them, but she didn't invite them in either. The door was no longer wide open. It had a lock now, and she held the key. On a crisp October morning, Lia sat at the kitchen table flipping through a catalog from the university program she'd been accepted into. She circled courses in color theory, garment construction, and sound design. She was quiet, focused, occasionally jotting notes in a notebook. Mary poured them both cups of tea and sat across from her. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked. Lia didn't need clarification. "Sometimes," she said, "not who they were, but who I thought they might be." Mary nodded. That was it, exactly. Grief for the fantasy, not the reality. "They missed out," she said. Lia looked up and smiled. "I didn't." They clinked mugs gently and sipped in silence. That night, as Mary was getting ready for bed, she walked past Lia's room and paused. The door was slightly open. Inside, Lia was standing in front of her closet, pinning something to the back of the door. Mary knocked softly and stepped in. "Can I see?" Lia stepped aside. On the back of the door was a poster board covered in images. Fabrics, architectural designs, faces of musicians and models, lines of poetry scribbled in the margins. At the center was a photo from her summer program. Laya standing beside Amelia Blackwell, both of them beaming. "It's a vision board," she said, "for what's next." Mary looked at it for a long time. "There's something else I want to do," Laya added. "For Dad." Mary turned to her. "I want to start using his last name too," Laya said. "I know I already have yours, and I want to keep that. But I want to honor him too, so double surname." Mary's eyes filled instantly. "Of course," she whispered. "He would have been so proud." The next morning, they began the paperwork. In the weeks that followed, Mary found herself changing too. She no longer tiptoed through conversations. She said what she thought. At work, she asked for a raise, and got it. At school meetings, she spoke up. At the grocery store, when someone asked if Laya was adopted, she didn't offer polite laughter or awkward explanations. She said, "That's my daughter. Please don't ask invasive questions." And then she walked away. Sometimes strength looked like silence. Other times it looked like walking away from a family barbecue with nothing but your child and your pride. But lately, Mary had learned, it could also look like staying exactly where you were and refusing to move, refusing to bend, refusing to apologize for your place in the world. Because that was the truth they'd tried to bury under casual cruelty and fake smiles. Laya had never needed their approval. She had never been an afterthought, never a burden. She had simply been in the wrong place, with the wrong people, waiting for permission to bloom. And now she had built her own garden. At dinner one night, Mary watched her daughter laugh over a story from school. Her cheeks were flushed with warmth, her eyes bright. She reached for a serving spoon with the ease of someone who knew they belonged at the table. Mary smiled. They didn't need a place at someone else's table anymore. They had built their own. The wind had shifted. Mary felt it one morning in early November as she stepped out onto the porch with her cup of coffee and found that the air smelled different, cleaner, cooler, somehow more honest. It wasn't just the weather changing. It was the house. It was her. It was Laya. There was something new in the rhythm of their days now, a steadiness that hadn't existed before, not even in the early years when James was still alive and they'd been learning how to be a family of 3. That version of life had been beautiful, yes, but it had also been full of effort, of quiet tension, of coded conversations and sidelong glances in rooms full of people who didn't know how to talk about what they didn't understand. Now, Mary realized, there were no more apologies taking up space between her and her daughter, no more strained excuses, no more compromises that cost them pieces of themselves. The house reflected that. It was still the same 2-bedroom rental on the east side of town, still full of thrift store furniture and hand-me-down appliances, but it felt different now. Mary had painted the kitchen a soft green that reminded her of Laya's favorite notebook. The living room, once a resting place for grief, now held color. The coffee table overflowed with magazines and journals and art supplies. There was music in the evenings again. Laya's soft melodies on the keyboard or little hums from the back of her throat as she sorted through fabrics on the floor. Her bedroom had transformed completely. Where once there had been a white bedspread and a single shelf of dusty books, there was now an entire creative studio. One wall was completely covered in corkboard and grid paper, pinned with mood boards and sketches, bits of lace and tiny fabric samples arranged like miniature galaxies. Another wall was lined with string lights and photographs from the summer program. Amelia Blackwell, her mentor Nadine, her group of new friends from cities Mary had only ever read about. The bookshelves were full now, but not just with novels. Textbooks on pattern making, music theory, color psychology. And on her desk, always, were Laya's journals. She wrote in them every night, not just about what she did, but what she thought, how she felt, what she dreamed. Mary saw these things and didn't touch them. She respected the space as one would a sacred place. But she was welcomed in. Sometimes, late in the evening, Laya would call her in just to sit, just to talk, sometimes to show her a sketch or play a few notes on the keyboard, other times just to be in the same room while they read their own separate things in silence. And it was in those moments that Mary realized what they had created wasn't just a physical home. It was a world where they were safe, where they were seen. Laya's school counselor called one afternoon in November with news that felt both expected and surreal. Laya had officially been awarded the Rising Creators Grant through the Conservatory's regional initiative, a scholarship that would cover the next 2 years of her advanced studies in music and design. Mary listened, nodding and thanking the counselor in a voice steadier than she felt, then hung up and sat at the kitchen table with both hands over her mouth. When she told Laya, the girl simply blinked and then smiled. It wasn't shock, it wasn't disbelief, it was understanding, it was confirmation. She already knew she was capable. The world was finally catching up. That weekend, they celebrated with takeout and a cake from the corner bakery. Mary let Laya invite a few of her new friends from the program, students who lived nearby and shared her love for art and music and had quickly become her community. They were a kaleidoscope of colors, accents, and styles. One wore platform boots and 3 nose rings, another brought a camera and took candid photos all night. They talked about politics and fashion and film as if it were all part of the same conversation. They included Mary without awkwardness, not as an observer, but as someone worth hearing. At one point in the evening, Mary caught Laya watching her. The girl smiled, small but bright, as if to say, "You can exhale now." After the guests left, Mary stood in the quiet kitchen, rinsing plates, when Laya patted in behind her. "Mom," she said, her voice soft. Mary turned. Laya held a small envelope. "I've been working on something." Mary dried her hands and took the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, hand-decorated with borders of tiny flowers. At the top, in Laya's careful script, were the words, "Proposal, Independent Creative Study, Designing for Dual Identity." Underneath was a detailed plan, an idea for a fashion and music fusion project exploring biracial identity, cultural duality, and personal expression. It would involve a small performance, a capsule clothing collection, and an original score. At the end, in a footnote, Laya had written, "Inspired by my mother, who taught me to hold both parts of myself without apology." Mary couldn't speak for a moment. Her throat was too tight. When she finally looked up, Laya was biting her lip. "I want to submit it next semester. If they approve it, I could work on it as my final project." Mary reached out and pulled her daughter into her arms. "You don't need anyone to approve it," she whispered. "It already matters." Later that night, after Laya had gone to bed, Mary sat on the couch and opened her laptop. She hadn't posted anything personal online in months, hadn't seen the need to engage with the curated versions of life that others clung to. But tonight felt different. She uploaded a picture from the celebration, the one where Laya was blowing out the candle on the cake, her friends around her, light dancing across her face. In the caption, Mary wrote only this: "She built her own room, her own voice, her own future. All I did was unlock the door. She expected silence, maybe a few likes. Instead, messages poured in. Not from Amanda, not from Darlene, not from the cousins who preferred comfort over confrontation, but from people Mary hadn't spoken to in years. Old co-workers, college acquaintances, parents from school who had always seemed distant. They thanked her. They shared their own stories about children who were different, children who were hurt by silence, children who had found their voices too late. And that's when Mary realized something even deeper. What she and Laya had built wasn't just for them. It was a blueprint. It was a possibility. It was a warning to the ones who had tried to make them small, and a lifeline for the ones still finding their way out of those same walls. The next week, Laya stood in front of the school board to present her proposal. She wore a dress she had designed herself, structured, elegant, bold. Her voice was steady. Her language was clear. When the board asked questions, she answered with authority. When they smiled in approval, she met their gaze without shrinking. Mary sat in the back row, watching, her hands folded in her lap. This was what strength looked like. Not loud, not angry, not brittle, but steady, unshakable, quietly unmovable. When it was over, Laya walked down the aisle and into her mother's arms. "They approved it," she said. "Unanimous vote." Mary kissed her forehead. "I never doubted it for a second." That night, Mary found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the house and paused in Laya's room. The girl was fast asleep, one arm flung over her head, a sketchbook open beside her. Mary stepped in and gently pulled the blanket over her shoulders. As she did, she glanced at the corkboard on the wall. Pinned in the center, with a gold thumbtack, was a small card. It was from Amelia Blackwell, the same card from months ago. "Stay bold, stay kind. Never wait for permission to shine." Mary smiled, turned off the light, and closed the door behind her. Laya didn't need permission anymore. She had everything she needed, and she had built it herself. Winter arrived without asking for permission. One day, the trees were holding on to the last of their burnished gold. The next morning, the wind had stripped them bare. The sky hung low and gray, the days shorter, the mornings slower. Mary found herself lighting candles in the evenings now, not for atmosphere, but for warmth of spirit. There was something in the hush of these days that made everything inside her feel still, like she was finally sitting at the bottom of a long, exhausting swim. The turbulence had passed. There was only quiet now. Laya thrived in this quiet. She filled it not with noise, but with intention. Each day she rose with the kind of focus Mary had once feared she would never see again. Mornings were for classes, afternoons for her independent project, and evenings, when the world outside dimmed to shadows and street lamps, belonged to her music. From her room, faint melodies floated through the hallway, delicate and careful at first, like she was touching each note with reverence. Then bolder, layered with courage. The proposal she had submitted months earlier had turned into something far more than an assignment. It had become a body of work that lived and breathed. Mary watched her daughter sketch, cut, sew, compose, and rehearse with a ferocity that was quiet but unmistakable. She didn't talk much about what the final performance would be. She simply said, "You'll see." And Mary trusted that. She had learned to. Laya no longer needed to prove herself, not to her mother, not to the family who had once tried to shrink her, not even to the institutions that now sought to uplift her. She had shifted out of the shadows they once placed her in, and she had never looked back. But others did. One cold Friday morning, Mary received a package on the doorstep. It was wrapped in brown paper with no return address, only her name written in neat cursive. She opened it slowly at the kitchen table, the light streaming through the window casting long shadows across the surface. Inside was a small wooden box, old and familiar. She recognized it instantly. It had belonged to her grandmother. A jewelry box carved with tulips and roses, the kind that opened with a tiny brass key. Mary had played with it as a child, twirling the ballerina inside until the hinges wore thin. Beneath the box was a note. She didn't have to read the signature to know it was from her mother. I thought maybe it was time you passed this down to Laya. I hope you can forgive the things I didn't say. Mary sat with the note for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She didn't move. There had been so many chances to say the right things, and none of them had been taken. A trinket now, no matter how sentimental, wasn't going to rewrite the past. But she couldn't deny the note carried something. Not healing, not reconciliation, but a ripple. An acknowledgment, however late, that something had happened. That silence had done harm. She placed the note back in the box and closed the lid. Later that night, she gave it to Laya without commentary. The girl turned it over in her hands and smiled softly. "Thanks," she said, and that was all. Weeks passed. The days began to stretch again, the light lasting just a little longer. Laya finished her final fittings. Her garments hung like stories in the hallway, each one stitched with metaphor. Mary didn't ask questions. She waited. The night of the showcase arrived on a breath of cold wind and clear skies. It was held in the auditorium of the Arts Conservatory, dressed in soft lights and golden accents. People from all over the state came to see the rising creators present their final works. Parents arrived in pressed coats. Photographers clicked shutters at the entrance. Musicians tuned their instruments backstage. The air buzzed with nerves and promise. Mary took her seat near the front, folding her hands in her lap. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't wonder who else was there. She only looked at the stage. One by one, the students presented. There were multimedia installations, dramatic fashion pieces, musical duets, spoken word accompanied by film. Each performance carried a fingerprint of its creator. The audience clapped, nodded, whispered their admiration. Then the lights dimmed, and a quiet hush fell over the room. A single spotlight appeared. Laya stepped into it. She wore a dress she had designed herself. It was unlike anything Mary had ever seen, not because it was extravagant, but because it was honest. The fabric shifted from deep brown at the hem to a soft ivory at the collar. The sleeves were asymmetrical, one sheer and embroidered with musical notation, the other structured and geometric. It was a map, a song, a story. Behind her, the screen lit up with a slow montage, childhood photos of Laya, images from her summer program, sketches fading into actual designs. Her music began to play, gentle at first, just a piano, then layers of violin and vocal harmonies joined, creating something that didn't just fill the room, it expanded it. Laya spoke. Not in performance, but in testimony. She spoke of identity, not torn between two worlds, but woven from both. She spoke of how she had spent years believing she had to earn space in rooms where others walked in freely. She spoke of the things she was told to hide, and how art had given her back her voice. She spoke of her mother. "She taught me," Laya said, "that sometimes love is not about staying quiet to keep peace. Sometimes love is about standing up and walking away." Mary couldn't move. She sat with her hand over her mouth, her eyes blurring with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. The performance ended not with applause, but with stillness, a moment of reverence. Then the crowd erupted. Later, backstage, Leah found her mother near the dressing area. Mary didn't say anything. She only opened her arms. Leah stepped into them and held on tight. "You were right," she whispered. "They had to see it. I didn't need to convince them. I just had to make them watch." Mary pulled back slightly and looked into her daughter's face. There was no trace of the girl who had once balanced soda cans on a tray while trying not to cry. That girl was still inside her, but she had been transformed, not erased, honored, expanded. "You were always the story," Mary said. "You just had to tell it." In the weeks that followed, Leah received offers, internships, invitations to apply to summer programs abroad, a letter from a mentor in New York who had seen her showcase and wanted to collaborate. But none of that changed her. She still cleaned her room on Sundays, still made toast with too much butter, still danced barefoot in the living room when no one was watching. One afternoon, they sat on the back porch wrapped in blankets. The wind rustled the bare trees. Mary sipped her tea and looked at her daughter. "I think about that day sometimes," she said. "The barbecue, the look on your face when that car pulled up." Leah smiled. "Me too. You didn't flinch, you didn't run, you just stood there." Leah shrugged. "I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it had to be better than staying." Mary nodded. "It was." They fell into silence again, the comfortable kind, the kind earned by surviving something together. "Do you ever think about going back?" Mary asked. Leah looked ahead toward the horizon. The sky was streaked with pink. "No," she said simply. "I think they're still at that table, waiting for us to ask for a seat." Mary laughed softly. "We built our own." Leah looked at her mother then, her eyes steady. "And ours doesn't have a head, just room." That night, Mary wrote in her journal. She had started one after the showcase, inspired by the way Leah used hers to capture what couldn't be said out loud. She wrote about what it meant to love someone so fiercely that you were willing to lose everything else. She wrote about how silence had once felt like survival, and how truth had become the bridge between them. She wrote about the moment she stopped asking for permission to protect her child. She didn't mention Amanda, or Darlene, or the cousins. They were no longer part of the story she was telling. She wrote only this: "My daughter was never small. They just built fences around her to make her seem that way. But she walked past them, and she never looked back." If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video, and feel free to share this one with someone who needs to hear it.